The moment my son-in-law's hand closed around my daughter's wrist at the Easter table, I counted to 3 inside my head. 1, 2, 3. His mother raised her wine glass and smiled the way women smile when they believe the world owes them a standing ovation. My daughter's eyes found mine across the white linen, and in them I saw a question so familiar, it broke something loose in my chest. She was not asking me to save her. She was asking whether she was right to feel afraid. I am 63 years old. My name is Lavinia Pierce, and for 27 years I was a Crown attorney in British Columbia, first in Prince George, then in Victoria. I have stood in courtrooms and built cases from fragments, a voicemail, a medical record, a neighbor who finally decided that silence was no longer something she could afford. My job was never to react. Our job was to listen, to document, and to choose the right moment. I never once imagined I would need those skills inside my own family. My daughter came into the world like someone who had already decided what mattered. She was born in the middle of a February ice storm at Victoria General, and she arrived without fuss. As if the drama of the weather outside had nothing to do with her. She grew up in our house in Fernwood with her father's stubbornness and my eye for detail, a combination that made her both infuriating and extraordinary in equal measure. She became an elementary school teacher, grade 3 in Saanich, and she referred to her 19 students as my kids long after each school year ended. Her colleagues called her the one who actually called the ministry when there was a problem rather than complaining in the staff room. She was not afraid of official channels. She was not afraid of much, as far as I could tell. Her father died of a cardiac event while shoveling snow off our driveway 2 Januaries before she met my son-in-law. He was 61, healthy, as far as anyone knew. Here in the morning, gone by noon. Grief does strange things to a person's perimeter. It doesn't weaken you exactly, it makes you porous. Things get in that would not have gotten in before. I know this because it happened to me as well, and I am a woman who spent nearly 3 decades trained to recognize when someone is being worked. She met my son-in-law at a professional development conference in Nanaimo. He was there representing a property development firm that had sponsored a session on community impact of new housing construction. The kind of session where developers wear lanyards and use the word sustainable frequently. She told me afterward that he asked thoughtful questions, that he remembered what she had said 3 conversations later, that he walked her to the ferry terminal and waited on the dock until her boat was out of sight. She said it felt old-fashioned, and she meant it as a compliment. He had a condominium in a new waterfront development in Victoria, a sailing club membership he rarely used, and a mother who lived 12 minutes away in Oak Bay. When I first met him, he shook my hand with both of his and called me by my first name without asking permission. I noted it. It is a small gesture, familiar before it has been earned, but it lands as warmth when you are grieving and hungry for ordinary things. I told myself I was applying Crown attorney eyes to a situation that did not require them. I told myself not to interfere. I was wrong on both counts. He did not begin with cruelty. That would have been far easier to name. He began with attention so precise it felt like being recognized. He remembered that my daughter took her coffee with 1 sugar and 2% milk. He drove to her school on Tuesday evenings so she would not have to take the bus home after parent-teacher interview nights. He said she was remarkable. He said it often and with apparent conviction. In those first months, When grief had made her invisible to herself, he made her feel seen. I understand now that visibility is not the same thing as respect. He was watching, not witnessing. He was cataloging what she was made of so that he would know later what would give way under pressure. The suggestions began in the second year. Small ones. He mentioned that a particular colleague of hers seemed to take advantage of her generosity, borrowing resources, expecting emotional labor, offering nothing in return. He said it once, gently, then circled back to it, until my daughter had quietly begun to see that colleague differently. He told her that her directness, the quality I had always loved most in her, could read as aggressive in certain professional settings. He said it out of concern. It was always framed as concern. His mother reinforced it from a different direction. She was a retired director of nursing services from a regional hospital outside Kelowna, and she spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being the final word in any room. She would sit across from my daughter at family gatherings and make careful comments about presentation, about timing, about what women in certain social circles were expected to understand without being told. She said my daughter was bright. She always said it as a prelude to a correction, the way you hold a door open, so that what comes through it seems invited. My daughter began to change. She called less often. When she did call, her answers were carefully shaped, like they had been reviewed before being spoken aloud. She began wearing long sleeves. When I asked, she told me she bruised easily now, always had, really, just a bump against a cabinet corner. I had known her body since I carried it. She had never bruised easily. I wrote this down. I said nothing yet. The moment I understood the true scale of what was happening, I was helping her clear dishes after a Sunday dinner. Just the two of us. He had stepped outside to take a call, and I touched her lightly on the shoulder. She flinched, not dramatically. A small, involuntary contraction, the kind a person develops after learning that touch sometimes precedes something worse. I kept my hand steady. I kept my face still. I set down my dish towel and looked at her directly. "Are you safe?" I asked. She laughed too quickly at the wrong pitch. "Mom, don't." I recognized the laugh. I had heard it in interview rooms and in courthouse hallways. It is the laugh people produce when the truth feels too expensive to speak out loud. Easter that year fell on a cold weekend in April. His mother had organized the gathering at her Oak Bay home, a generous house on Beach Drive with a garden that backed toward the water. There were perhaps 12 people. His cousins, a development colleague, 2 women from his mother's charity committee. The table was beautifully set. She always set a beautiful table. My daughter had made the maple Dijon salad she has made since she was 19, and that everyone always praised without reservation. As she set the serving bowl down, the tongs slipped, and a small splash of dressing landed near his plate. It was a drop, the kind of thing that happens at every table, in every family across this country 100 times a year, and no one marks it. He did not raise his voice. He turned to look at her the way someone turns to assess an instrument before deciding how it needs to be handled. Then, below the edge of the table where not everyone could see, he closed his hand around her wrist and held it. Not briefly. His mother lifted her wine glass across the table. "Accidents happen to people who are rushing," she said pleasantly. "We all just need to slow down and pay better attention." The table moved on. Someone refilled glasses. My daughter removed her wrist eventually, or he released it. I could not tell which. and she picked up her fork and continued eating. Her face held the careful blankness of someone who has practiced not reacting until not reacting is the only thing left. I finished my dinner. I said pleasant things to his mother's friend about the spring garden. I complimented the lamb. I drove home along Dallas Road with the window open despite the cold, because I needed the air to keep my thoughts from doing what they wanted to do, which was to come completely apart. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I still use them, old habit from years of case notes, and I wrote down everything I had observed. I wrote down what I had noticed over the preceding 18 months. Dates where I could recall them, details, the sleeve lengths, the flinch, the laugh, the question about bruising. I wrote until I had no more notes, and then I sat with the pad in front of me and looked at what I had produced. It was a pattern. Patterns are not accidents. Patterns are choices made repeatedly by someone who believes they will not be held accountable. I began to move carefully. I spoke to my daughter regularly, without pressure, without accusation. I was not trying to extract an admission. I was trying to keep a door open so that when she was ready to walk through it, she would know it was there. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not going anywhere. I told her, once, plainly, without drama, that I had spent 27 years looking at evidence, and that evidence did not lie, and that whenever she was ready to talk, I would be there with no conditions attached. The counter-offensive came within 3 weeks. My daughter relayed to me apologetically that he had told her I was interfering in their marriage, that I was a woman who had difficulty watching her children build lives that no longer required managing, that my career had given me the habit of treating ordinary situations like prosecutions. She delivered it gently, like a child reporting something that had already been decided above her level. And I heard his phrasing in her words, the way you recognize a borrowed phrase. Then things became more systematic. A school board contact she had mentioned to me, a woman she trusted and had worked alongside for years, turned noticeably distant. A reference she had been counting on for a vice principal application went quiet without explanation. A senior administrator suggested to her, in gentle language, that it might be wise to ensure things were stable at home before stepping into a more visible professional role. That phrase, stable at home, carried his fingerprints on it. I had seen this strategy deployed before, in courtrooms and in evidence packages. You remove the external scaffolding first, the professional allies, the colleagues, the sense of a self that exists outside the relationship. Once those are gone, the person has nowhere to stand except inside the story they have been given. He was methodical about it. He understood that isolated people stop trusting their own perceptions. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in October. I knew from the first breath she was close to a particular kind of edge. Not the edge I feared most. She was not in immediate danger that night. She was at the edge of surrender, of deciding that leaving was too costly, that she was too tired, that perhaps with more patience and better effort she could make it workable. "What if I'm the problem?" she asked. I had heard those words before, too, in pre-trial interviews, in the waiting areas outside family courts, from women who had been told the same story so many times and by so many people that it had begun to feel like their own memory. "You are not the problem," I told her. "You are the evidence." She was quiet for a long time. I let the silence sit. When she finally spoke again, it was not to argue with me or to defend him. She simply said she was tired of being afraid of things she had never been afraid of before, that she missed herself, that she could not remember the last time she had made a decision. Any decision, even something small, without first calculating how it would land. I told her I would be there when she was ready. I told her there was no deadline and no conditions. I told her I loved her without the requirement that she be anything other than what she was. 3 days after that phone call, an email arrived in my inbox with no display name. The subject line said only, "You should know what he came from." Inside was a short paragraph from a woman who identified herself as a former charge nurse who had worked under his mother at a hospital in Kelowna for 11 years. She said she had filed an internal complaint in 2014 and had been dismissed within months of doing so. She said she had kept records. She said she had followed my son-in-law's name in regional properties intermittently over the years, and that a piece in a Victoria publication mentioning his marriage to a Saanich schoolteacher had finally moved her to reach out. She said she had been waiting for someone who was positioned to do something with what she had. She attached 2 documents. The first was her original internal complaint, a detailed account of a patient she had treated whose injuries were inconsistent with the explanation given, and of a conversation she had overheard between his mother and that patient's husband in a hospital corridor. His mother had spoken to this man with the calm efficiency of someone sharing administrative guidance. She had explained, practically and without apparent distress, how a wife's account of events could be shaped to remain manageable. The complaint had been reviewed and closed in under a week. No action. The second document was a BC Nurses Union grievance she had filed after her dismissal, which referenced the first complaint. The grievance had been settled quietly. Non-disclosure conditions had been signed. She had kept copies regardless, she told me, because she had been a nurse long enough to understand that paperwork outlasts agreements. I read both documents 3 times. Then I sat with them for a long while before I did anything else. What I was looking at was not a man who had arrived at cruelty on his own. It was a lineage of it. A woman who had spent decades in institutional authority and had used that authority to normalize what is not normal, first for strangers, then for her son. He had not invented his approach to my daughter. He had been taught it, taught that certain responses to women were correction rather than harm, taught that silence was institutional competence. Taught by a woman who had practiced these lessons long enough to have forgotten they required justification. I called a retired family law judge in Vancouver, whom I have known for over 20 years, a woman I trust without reservation. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. She gave me several names. I made additional calls over the following days, carefully through appropriate channels. My daughter and I met for coffee at the Tim Hortons near her school on a Saturday morning in November early, before the weekend crowd arrived. I spread nothing on the table. I simply told her, slowly and without editorial, what I had found and what it meant. I told her the choice of what to do with it was entirely hers. I told her she was not imagining things. I told her she was not the problem. I told her that what had been done to her had a structure and a name, and that it had a history that extended further back than their marriage. She held her cup in both hands and looked at the table for a long time. When she looked up, her face was different, not happy, not relieved. Something more essential than either. the expression of someone who has been told that the thing they believe to be their fault was not, in fact, theirs. It took her 6 more weeks to file. I did not rush her. Leaving is not a single decision made once and cleanly. It is a series of smaller decisions made in the right order by a person who is finally ready to make them. She contacted a victim services coordinator in Saanich. She spoke to a family law lawyer in Victoria. She had kept text messages in a folder on her phone that she had been asked repeatedly to delete and had not. A physician she had visited privately 3 months prior, in an appointment she had made without mentioning to anyone, had documented and photographed what she needed documented. She had been preparing longer than I knew. When she filed the divorce petition and the complaint with the Victoria Police Department, the response came quickly from his side. An expensive lawyer. Communications through mutual acquaintances suggesting she was acting impulsively, that he was seeking professional support, that public proceedings could complicate her own professional standing. His mother made calls through her charity committee connections. The narrative they tried to build was familiar: a troubled woman, an overbearing mother, a good man unfairly accused. My daughter did not waver. She had spent years in classrooms holding the line with frightened 9-year-olds who tested every boundary to see if it would hold. She knew how to hold a line. The documents from his mother's former colleague were passed, with her permission and through the proper legal process, to the BC College of Registered Nurses. An investigation was opened. The hospital in Kelowna was separately contacted regarding the 2014 complaint closure. Those processes continue. I cannot speak to where they will end, but the information is no longer locked inside a non-disclosure agreement. The silence that protected the original complaint for over 10 years finally met something that could not be silenced the same way. My son-in-law was issued a no-contact order in January. He violated it in March through a message sent by a third party, which was documented and filed. His situation became considerably more difficult after that. His mother has not spoken to my daughter since the petition was filed. I expect she is identifying a new strategy. People like her always are. My daughter lives now in a small apartment in James Bay, 6 blocks from the Inner Harbor. She runs in the mornings along the Ogden Point breakwater, regardless of weather, which in Victoria means she runs in the rain most of the year, and she does not mind. She went back to her classroom in September, and one of her grade 3s made her a handwritten card in November that said she was the best teacher in all of BC and probably the whole world. She has it on her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a maple leaf. She called her father's sister at Christmas for the first time in 3 years, and they talked for over an hour. She is choosing things again: who to call, what to cook, whether to leave the windows open. I know these sound like ordinary things. They are not ordinary when they have been taken from you. I want to say one thing plainly before I finish, because I have had 3 years now to think about it, and I am still not entirely at peace with it. I waited too long. I want to be honest about that. I told myself I was respecting her autonomy as an adult. I told myself that a mother who interferes does more harm than good. Both of those things are sometimes true, and I used their partial truth as permission to look away from something I should have named much earlier. I am a woman who built a career on naming things. I could not name this one because I loved her too much to believe it was happening. If there is anyone watching this who is where my daughter was, Not necessarily in the same specific circumstances, but inside that particular kind of narrowing, that quiet shrinking, that moment when you realized you had stopped disagreeing and couldn't clearly remember when. I want you to know that your instincts are telling you something true. That recognition you feel is not overreaction. It is the part of you that never fully accepted the story you were given about yourself. Here is what I know now that I should have known earlier. First, the absence of obvious violence is not evidence of safety. Control that leaves no visible marks is still control, and it is the kind that is hardest to leave because you cannot point to it easily. Second, isolation is always strategy, never coincidence. If the people who knew you before suddenly cannot reach you, that is architecture. It was built by someone, deliberately, to serve a purpose. Third, when someone explains your own feelings back to you in a way that makes your feelings the problem rather than the cause of them, that is not insight. That is replacement. They are replacing your account of your interior life with theirs, and they are doing it because your account threatens something. Fourth, asking for help is not weakness and it is not betrayal. It is the thing that breaks the story. It is the thing they work hardest to prevent because they know it is the thing that works. Fifth, leaving is a process, not an event. It takes time. It is allowed to take time, and it is never, under any circumstances, the wrong direction. What came up for you while you were listening? And where in Canada, or wherever in this world you are tonight, are you watching from? If you believe stories like this one deserve to be heard, please share this video. Your voice, passed along to the right person at the right moment, might be the thing that finally gets through.